When the silence begins, the avoidant is not a blank slate. They are not sitting in neutrality, waiting without expectation to see what happens next. They are not approaching the no contact with an open, curious mind about what it might produce. They are approaching it, whether they are conscious of this or not, with a very specific set of expectations that have been shaped by everything their pattern has taught them about how this moment usually goes. And understanding those expectations, understanding exactly what the avoidant is anticipating on the other side of the silence, changes everything about how you navigate it. Because most people in no contact are operating without this information. They are focused on what they are feeling, on how to get through the silence, on whether they are doing it right, on whether it is working, on what the avoidant might be thinking and feeling and doing. But they are not thinking about what the avoidant is expecting. And the avoidant's expectations are the thing that determines whether the no contact produces something real or simply resets the dynamic back to where it started. So let me tell you what they are expecting. The first and most foundational expectation is that you will reach out first. This is not cynicism on the avoidant's part. It is pattern recognition. Because in most cases, across most of their relationship history, this is what has happened. The distance has been created, the withdrawal has run its course, and the other person has eventually broken the silence. Not always quickly, not always dramatically, but eventually. And the avoidant, consciously or not, is carrying the expectation that this particular silence will follow the same arc. The expectation is not cruel. It is simply the learned prediction of a nervous system that has watched this pattern complete itself enough times to treat it as reliable. You will reach out. The silence will end on your initiative. The dynamic will resume with the familiar terms intact. The avoidance distance will have been absorbed, as it has always been absorbed, without fundamentally changing what the relationship is or what either person is required to offer within it. That expectation is the first thing your no contact needs to address. Not by telling the avoidant you are not going to reach out, not by making a statement about what you are doing or why, but simply by not doing what is expected, by letting the silence continue past the point where it usually ends, past the point of your own discomfort, past the point where the urge to break it feels almost irresistible, past the point where you have convinced yourself that one small message would not really change anything. Because the moment you reach out, before the expectation has been genuinely disrupted, the avoidance nervous system relaxes back into the familiar pattern. The prediction was correct. The silence ended the way silences always end. The distance was survived without cost, and you are back at the beginning. The second expectation is that if you do maintain the silence, you are doing it strategically. The avoidant, whose own behavior is often unconsciously strategic in its management of distance and proximity, tends to project a degree of intentionality onto the other person's behavior as well. And so the silence is often interpreted, particularly in the early stages, not as genuine disengagement, but as a tactical move, as the no-contact strategy that they have probably heard about, as the other person doing the thing you do when you have read that going quiet makes an avoidant come back. And here is why that interpretation matters. Because strategy can be weighted out. If the avoidant believes your silence is a calculated move designed to produce a specific response, they can apply patience to it. They can tell themselves that engaging would be giving you what your strategy is designed to produce. They can frame their own non-response as refusing to be manipulated. They can wait for the strategy to run its course and for the real you, the one who is still there underneath the tactic, to eventually surface. But genuine disengagement cannot be weighted out in the same way. Because genuine disengagement is not a move in a game. It is the real, actual redirection of a person's life. And a person whose life has genuinely moved, who is not performing absence, but actually building something elsewhere, produces a quality of no contact that the avoidance expectation of strategy cannot quite account for. The texture is wrong for strategy. The quality of the absence is different. The avoidant reaches for evidence that you are waiting underneath the silence and keeps not finding it. And the not finding it is when the expectation starts to fracture. The third expectation is that the dynamic will resume, more or less unchanged, when the silence ends. This is perhaps the most significant expectation of all, and the one that the avoidant is least likely to examine consciously. It is the quiet assumption that whatever ends the silence, whether they reach out or you do, or some circumstance brings you back into contact, the fundamental terms of the relationship will be available to return to. That the warmth will still be there, that the availability will still be there, that the you who was present in the dynamic, patient and understanding, and willing to absorb the cost of their pattern, will still be the you they encounter on the other side of the silence. This expectation is the one that your genuine transformation during no contact most directly challenges. Because the person who emerges from a real, honestly engaged period of no contact is not the same person who entered it. Not dramatically different, not unrecognizably changed, but shifted in specific important ways. Less organized around the avoidant, less immediately available for the dynamic to resume its familiar shape, more settled in their own sense of what they need, and less willing to accept the indefinite postponement of it. And when the avoidant encounters that shifted version of you, when the silence ends and the person who shows up is not quite the person they were expecting, the dynamic cannot simply resume, because one of its two participants has changed, and changed in a direction that the avoidant's usual management strategies do not have a reliable response to. The fourth expectation is one that the avoidant would be very unlikely to acknowledge if you ask them directly. It is the expectation that the connection will still be there when they are ready for it. Not necessarily the relationship, not necessarily you in the romantic sense, but the connection, the specific quality of what existed between you, the rare thing that they know, somewhere underneath the managed composure, is not ordinary. They expect it to be available when they arrive at the point of being ready for it. This expectation is the most quietly devastating one for the avoidant to have disrupted, because it is built on a foundation that felt solid from inside the pattern, but is actually entirely dependent on your ongoing willingness to maintain it. The connection requires your participation to exist, and a you that has genuinely moved, that has redirected your life and your attention and your emotional investment towards your own becoming, is a you that is no longer maintaining the connection in the way that kept it available. The connection does not disappear entirely. What was real does not become unreal. But the version of it that was always there, always warm, always accessible whenever the avoidant arrived at readiness, that version requires your active presence to sustain, and your active presence has gone elsewhere. The avoidant who arrives at readiness and reaches towards the connection they expected to find still there, and finds instead a you who is genuinely occupied with your own life, who is warm but not waiting, who is open but not available on the previous terms, encounters the most honest version of the cost of the pattern they have ever experienced. Not delivered as a message, not explained in a conversation, just lived, in the simple, undeniable reality of what happens when the person they expected to find still there has genuinely, finally, built something of their own to be. That is not a strategy. That is the truth. And the truth, arriving through the specific disruption of every expectation the avoidant brought to the silence, is the only thing that has ever produced something genuinely different. Not a reset, not a resumption of the familiar terms, but the beginning, tentative and uncertain and without guarantees, of something that neither of them has experienced inside this dynamic before. A relationship between two people who are both actually present, both actually changed, both, finally, starting from somewhere real.